These are equations that are written in the form y equals ax squared plus c. So not in standard form. This is standard form. When it's in this form, bx, there's nothing there. When it's written in that form, what does c tell you? You need to know this for your test. It tells you the y-intercept and what else? When it's in this form. It also tells you the vertex. Remember we looked at examples on Desmos? If it's in the form ax squared plus c, c is the y-intercept and the vertex. When it's in standard form, c is just the y-intercept, okay? So let's read the first question. Who wants to start? So we're looking at a relationship between a ball being dropped from a platform. So let's draw a little sketch. And it can be modeled by the equation h equals negative 4.9 t squared plus 13. H represents the height of the ball in meters. And t represents what? The time, in seconds. Okay? Now we're trying to figure out what is the height of the platform. The ball is being thrown from a platform. So does any time pass when the ball is starting on the platform? Has any time passed yet? So what would the time be equal to? 0. Well, we just talked about this. If it's in this form, what is the value of c? What is it in this equation? Is c negative 4.9 or is it 13? It would be 13, which represents the y-intercept. So we know that the ball has to be thrown from here, and the equation, does it open up or down? So the path of the ball is going to look something like this, right? So for question A, what's the height of the platform? Where does the ball start? How many meters off the ground? 13 meters. Excellent. Now we have to figure out how long, so how many seconds, right, did it take the ball to land? So I'm trying to figure out when the ball touches the ground. What point on the parabola would that be? Would that be the y-intercept? Would it be a vertex? What would it be when the ball hits the ground? Where's the ground? The x-intercept, correct, or the zeros of the relation. So do you remember this from last class? Once we have the equation and we're trying to figure out the x-intercepts, what's the first thing we have to do? Starts with an F. We have to factor it. Okay? Now the easiest way to do this is to always start by dividing everything by a. What's the a value? Negative 4.9. I'm going to start by factoring that out. So negative 4.9 t squared divided by negative 4.9. What am I left with? T squared. And then I have a positive divided by a negative gives me a negative. What's 13 divided by 4.9? What do you get? 2.65. Okay? How do I factor this now? Do h equals, we have the negative 4.9 there, but now we're going to figure out what that is in factored form. Well, what's the square root of t squared? T. What's the square root of 2.65? 1.63. Let's round it. So that means positive 1.63 and then negative 1.63. Those are the two factors, right? So I have t plus 1.63 times t minus 1.63. I have to find two values of t. So I'm going to set both of those equal to 0, right? Because we're trying to find the x-intercept. So I'll write it over here. T plus 1.63 equals 0, and t minus 1.63 equals 0. So what's the first value of t? If it's t plus 1.63, what's the opposite of plus? Okay, so t is equal to negative 1.63 and t is equal to positive 1.63. Now, there are two x-intercepts as your answer, but only one of them makes sense in this question. Can you have a negative amount of time? Can I say, look here, the ball went back in time? Can you go back in time? So if you were to graph this as a parabola, yes, it's going to intercept at negative 1.63, and it's going to intercept at positive 1.63, right? But which answer am I going to use for the question when it says, how long did it take the ball to land? How many seconds from where it started did it take the ball to actually land? How many seconds? 1.63 seconds, that's the answer. That's it. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so similar question. An archway was built for a wedding, so obviously we know it's in the shape of a parabola, right? The shape of the archway is modeled by this equation, which is in the form y equals ax squared plus c. When it's in that form, what does c tell you? The y-intercept and the vertex. So if we were to graph this, it would look like this, the graph. This would be the y, this would be the x, okay? When it's in the form ax squared plus c, when you don't have a bx in there, so it's h equals negative 0.15 d squared plus 15. So just looking at that and looking at the equation, you can automatically answer A. So what would be the maximum height of this archway? Look at the graph, look at your equation. Where is the vertex located? It's located at 0.15. This point has to be 0.15. So what's the maximum height of the archway? How high is it? At the highest point, what's the height of it? 15 what? The height of the archway in feet. 15 feet high. Okay? Now we have to find the width. So this is similar to what we did last class. If we're trying to find the width of the archway, everyone look here. If I know this point, are we looking? What is this point referred to as? A y-intercept, what is it? An x-intercept, right? If I know the two x-intercepts, then can I figure out the width? That means I know the distance from here to here, and I would know the distance from, this is 0, here to here. If I know the two x-intercepts, can I figure out the width? The total distance across the archway. How do we find x-intercepts? What do we have to do? Starts with an F. We just did it. Factor. So how am I going to factor this? It's in the form ax squared plus c, so what should I divide everything by to get it into into factored form? What should I divide everything by? Negative 0.15. We divide everything by a. Same thing as we did in the other question. Right? So that means it's negative 0.15, and then we have to figure out what we have left in the bracket. Well, negative 0.15 divided by negative 0.15, that cancels out. What am I left with inside the bracket? D squared, right? I'm dividing everything by A. Now we're dividing positive 15 divided by negative 0.15. Positive divided by negative is a negative. It's negative 100. Is that a difference of squares now? Can you factor this more? Difference of squares. So I'll write it over here. So we have two things that multiply together. How do you factor this difference of squares? This is a difference of squares, right? What times what gives me d squared? D. Square root of 100. What times what is 100? 10. It's a difference of squares, so it's got to be d plus 10 and d minus 10, right? Positive and a negative gives you a negative. Are we good so far? So how do I find the x-intercepts? I've just factored it now. Well, let's figure out what are the x-intercepts. What are the two factors? D plus 10 and D minus 10. So D plus 10 equals what? 0. And then D minus 10 equals 0. So what are the two x-intercepts, two values of D? So the first x-intercept is negative 10. So look here. Does that make sense? This intercepts at negative 10. And then the second x-intercept is positive 10. Does this make sense? It intercepts at positive 10. That means the archway has a distance from 0 to negative 10. What's that width? From 0 to negative 10. How many units is that? 10 units. And then it goes from 0 to positive 10. How many units is that? 10 units. Altogether, what is the width of the archway? From 0 to negative 10 is 10, and then from 0 to positive 10 is 10. Altogether, what's the total width? Shaquila, you said it. 10 plus 10 equals 20 feet.